West London, an angry crowd has gathered outside a trade show at Olympia, the MIPIM property exhibition that brings together investors, developers, landowners and local authorities from across the UK. The protesters are a mixed group. There are many older people worried about the way that housing, to buy or for rent, is spiralling out of reach for many people.
My banner says that we need more genuinely affordable rents in London.
Because large developers allow the very minimum number of social housing they can get away with, whereas people who live around here, who work around here, whose families have always been here and who are needed to keep the city going, can't even afford social housing, never mind buying expensive housing.
The house I live in, which I own, I couldn't afford now. That's what the increase in property prices has been.
Disproportionately, rich properties are coming in, often not even occupied. People just buying the properties for investment. You know, it's criminal when there are people who need somewhere to live.
This programme is about affordable housing, cheaper homes for people on low incomes to rent or part buy. I'll be asking, has this affordable housing been sacrificed in the post-recession rush to get building again, not just in London, but across the UK? As planning rules have been relaxed, have councils had the wool pulled over their eyes by commercial developers who want to dodge their obligations to build affordable homes?
Good morning, everybody. Great to see you.
Boris Johnson, the Mayor of London, addressed a packed hall. While he acknowledged there is a housing crisis, Boris Johnson doesn't agree with many of the protesters outside about how it's been caused.
The first non-solution to the current crisis is to claim that it is all somehow the fault of international investors and we need to repel their enthusiasm. I think that is absolute rubbish. We need to welcome international investment to our city to get projects going and to help London deliver the real solution, which is to build hundreds of thousands more homes. Homes that are affordable for all Londoners.
The message from the Mayor's team is that more affordable homes are being built in the capital than at any time since 1981, with nearly 18,000 being completed last year. And yet the need is still at a critical level. Kevin Craig is a businessman and a Labour councillor in Lambeth in South London.
Where are these homes coming from? Even in London, a reforming council like Lambeth, with a housing waiting list of 20,000, has only pledged to build 1,000 homes for the next 4 years. When I was much younger, I chaired the planning committee of Lambeth Council. We were giving planning permissions worth billions to property developers. And if there's one thing I learnt, it's that planning permission is one of the most powerful things a local council ever has.
And that's especially the case now. Local councils give permission for development with important conditions attached. Those conditions very often say that a certain percentage, maybe 30 or 40% of homes on the site, must be affordable. Effectively, the developers are forced to build the kind of homes councils used to build, which eats into their company profits. The trouble is, developers who can successfully argue that building affordable homes would make their projects unprofitable can have that obligation removed. All they have to do is to submit something called a financial viability assessment, showing that the development, given all the land and building costs, cannot possibly make sufficient profit unless the affordable housing is cut back or removed altogether. This is happening all over the UK. Nick Mathiasen is the business correspondent at the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, which has kept a watching brief on this issue.
We analysed the biggest housing schemes in Britain's 12 biggest cities. That was over 80 schemes, and we found that 60% of those didn't meet affordable housing targets, which means all of those schemes had a viability assessment attached to them. They had successfully reduced the number of affordable homes.
Hammersmith and Fulham in West London is one place where that's happening. Stephen Cowan is the leader of the council.
The critical issue is when developers come to us and say to us that they've done a land assessment, their valuation is we can only afford 7 or 12% affordable housing. And it's invariably nonsense. These documents are invariably not worth the paper they're written on. And I think developers are taking the mickey. We recently had one case on Hammersmith King Street where the developer offered 7%. And when we turned that down, they appealed, and the ridiculous situation was the housing inspector overturned it and said, not only can you build your scheme, you don't even need the 7% affordable housing. This is a housing crisis, and what we need to do is fix it.
Stephen Cowan became leader of Hammersmith and Fulham Council when Labour won the local election and took over from the Conservative administration in May last year. He inherited a huge and controversial £8 billion regeneration scheme of the Earls Court area, for which developer Capital and Counties Properties, or CAPCO, had got planning permission. It's their intention to build 7,500 new homes, mostly for sale. One-bedroom flats start at nearly £600,000. They aim to deliver 11% as affordable housing, far below the council's stated target of 40%. We met Dave Hill, a journalist who's been monitoring the Earls Court project in the West Kensington housing estate, one of 2 estates set to be demolished in the scheme.
The idea of the project is really to completely transform, over a period of about 20 years, the whole of this area, and also to knock down and replace the world-famous Earls Court Exhibition Centre. The 2 estates comprise 760 homes, and the promise is that all 760 will be replaced on a like-for-like basis, somewhere in the regeneration area. And in addition to those 760 replacements, there is promised to be a further 740 homes which are described as affordable. None of those will be for social rent. They will fall into the intermediate part of the affordable spectrum, which means shared ownership, or possibly what's called affordable rent, which is subsidised housing but not as cheap as social rent, or possibly simply a bit discounted from market rates. Even these might be a bit steep for quite a lot of people. And the big question in terms of the viability of the scheme overall is that 740 really anything like enough? Couldn't the developer CAPCO really have produced a lot more? Shouldn't the local authorities driven them harder to produce a lot more affordable homes than they actually did?
Well, it's better than nothing, but not nearly as good as it should have been.
Dr. Richard Fordham is a housing expert in the rarefied area of viability assessments and planning deals made by councils on affordable housing. He was called in by the Save Earls Court campaign to look at the developers' figures. Too often, he says, developers manipulate the viability figures. If they can show a very low expected profit, they'll plead that they can't afford to build the council's target of cheaper homes.
Well, it's certainly quite easy for them to do that, and it's an obligation on the council to try and understand as much as it can about the costs and returns of development.
But it's very technical, isn't it? And
of course.
And very subtle. And very difficult for anyone who's not an expert in this area to understand.
Absolutely.
But don't local authorities have the right people to understand it?
Well, unfortunately not. The town planning experts are experts in town planning, not in viability analysis. It's a specialised field, and obviously developers actually employ people who specialise in viability analysis. Local authorities generally do not, which is why in the case we're discussing, District Valuer Services were employed, who are experts in viability analysis, but the everyday local authority can't afford to hire a consultant every time a housing application comes in, and they have to do it themselves. And so they have to have some level of knowledge of viability, but it's often not high enough.
CAPCO, the developer, did not wish to be interviewed about viability and its reasons for offering 11% of affordable housing at Earls Court. But as we heard, the District Valuer Service, which is part of a government agency, was called in to check CAPCO's viability figures on behalf of the council. It signed off that figure of 11%. But as Richard Fordham points out, it also expressed reservations about the way the developers' figures had been calculated.
Yes, rather more than reservations. They went on then to make 2 further very important comments. One is that the whole analysis should be redone in the near future when a bit more detail was known about the scheme. And the second thing was the suggestion by the DVS for a review mechanism. None of us can tell what the house prices of 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now are going to be, and that's why the DVS suggestion of a review mechanism where triggers allow the target to rise when house prices have risen much further against costs than they are now, and the fact that wasn't put in is really quite scandalous.
Why did that happen? One of the chief drivers of the Earls Court regeneration was Stephen Greenhalgh, who was the leader of Hammersmith and Fulham Council until 2012. He's now a deputy mayor and candidate to replace Boris Johnson. I put to him the fact that there was no review mechanism at Earls Court to safeguard public money.
That went through Cabinet after my time as a council leader. I have to say, though, the way that we negotiate with developers, that can be improved. I'm someone that would want to see reforms, but you can only work with the system you've got.
But surely it would be sensible to have some kind of provision that the public purse would not lose out if the values go up.
I'm very much in favour of something like a statutory overage when it comes to viability assessments. If a developer says, I can't build unless you enable me to assume a valuation of £800 per square foot, but actually when you look at the values that they sell the properties for, they're £1,600 a square foot. Well, the overage mechanism would ensure that the public purse gets that upside, even though the developer pled poverty.
And here's the big surprise. Even Stephen Greenhalgh, the man who helped to push through the Earls Court scheme, who is no great enthusiast for social rented housing, even he has serious doubts about viability reports.
I don't think the current system is fit for purpose. I think there need to be broad-scale changes, not only to the way we approach the level of affordable housing on each development, which at the moment is through viability. It is flawed. Very often a developer promises a certain amount of housing and says, I can't afford any more, and then we see a huge uplift in land values. Now, land values go up and down. In my view, we need to get a far more certain way of ensuring that the public purse gets good value.
So you feel that developers have used viability reports cynically to wriggle out of their responsibilities?
Well, I certainly believe that some developers on certain occasions have used viability to their advantage, and we haven't captured the land value uplift. And equally, I can see certain local authorities that do not want to see any development happening in their patch using it also cynically. So on both sides of the argument, I see problems with the current system.
Can we take the case of Earls Court, which is a huge and complex regeneration project, with a bottom line that in its current form it delivers just 11% of affordable housing, none of it for social rent? Why was that decision made to let the developers Capco go ahead on that basis?
So we've got to understand, now Earls Court, it's an area that needs to see investment. In order for that to happen, you need to invest in the infrastructure. That requires a cost. You do need to pay for the rehousing of the tenants and leaseholders. That is a substantial cost. But it's hard to only measure a success of Earls Court through the prism of the absolute amount of affordable housing. I look at the thousands of extra homes, the 2 million square foot of commercial development, a huge regeneration opportunity.
But doesn't that mean that the resulting project is not going to be mixed? It's going to be mostly rich people?
Well, certainly we're going to have thousands of extra homes. We've got to recognise that affordable housing is not the be-all and end-all. We need thousands of extra homes. What we're actually doing is achieving a double of the affordable housing. Now, that's with the current systems, using viability. That was the advice that I had from professional officers. Do I think that there are better ways than viability to secure more affordable housing? Absolutely.
These unsatisfactory developer deals are not only a problem in London. The outcome of these obligations on developers to build affordable properties, known as Section 106, are a growing issue right across the country.
You hear of developers who are paid bonuses for arguing down the number of affordable units.
And allowing the developer Henderson to reduce on-site affordable housing from 40% to zero.
At Upton Park there are to be 838 homes, but no social housing.
Developers are offering a further 10% down the road on another.
Concerned that in the end there will be no affordable housing worthy of the name built on this development.
Framlingham is a market town in Suffolk. It's a very attractive place to live. There's a 12th century castle, a handsome market square and good schools. Christopher Sharp is chair of the Framlingham Residents Association, and he showed us a site which has been the subject of a conflict over affordable housing.
We're about a quarter of a mile from the centre of town, on what used to be the site of the railway station coming into Fram. It then became Bibby's, which was a seed manufacturing site here. Behind us here we have the Station Hotel, which is still a very nice pub. And on the other side of the road there's a mixture of pasture, greenfield, and also a technology centre, a garage and a car dealership.
A prime site, in other words, which was bought by one of the biggest of the local developers, Hopkins Homes.
Hopkins Homes then put in an application for 140 houses, which was granted on the provision as one of the S106 that they should build 47 affordable homes within that 140. That was granted in 2010.
But nothing was built. The next thing the residents knew was there was an application from Hopkins to remove the promised 47 affordable homes. James Hopkins is the executive chairman of Hopkins Homes.
That site was bought pre-2008. We had the most severe recession the country's had for many, many years, and that site was unviable for us to develop. And therefore, if we'd gone on and developed that site, we'd have developed it to made a loss. And therefore, developers like myself wouldn't do that. So those sites remain stagnant. Nothing's going to happen with it. So the government came up with this policy whereby you could apply for the Section 106 affordable housing allocation to be removed. We did a viability report that was submitted to the council, that was ratified by the council, and they recommended that that would be approved at the council committee meeting. Unfortunately, the councillors didn't agree with that and they refused it. We then went to appeal, and because we'd conformed with government policy, the appeal was passed, and we're now about to start building over 100 houses on that site.
Framlingham is in the Suffolk Coastal District Council area. Council policy is that 1/3 of new builds on sites like this should be affordable. But in the last 5 years, according to council figures, 175 affordable homes have been built. That's an average of just 35 a year from various sources, including Hopkins Homes, which comes to just over 7% of affordables a year, instead of the council's target of 33%. I asked James Hopkins how, in his view, the system is working.
We're the largest provider of affordable housing within Suffolk Coastal, and from that point of view, we're very happy.
But aren't commercial developers using viability reports to argue down the number of affordable homes, as indeed Hopkins has done in North Walsham, in Norfolk, in Wickham Market, Bury St Edmunds and Framlingham?
The vast majority of our applications have the full quota of affordable housing. There are one or two, as you've mentioned, where we didn't do affordable housing, North Walsham and Framlingham, but they were based on the government policy, which is if the site is unviable, you can apply for that housing development not to have affordable housing.
Robert Eburn is also from Hopkins Homes. He's the planning manager.
The Framlingham site was regarded as unviable because it has significant ground costs in terms of cleaning up the site. It's a contaminated site, which makes it inordinately more expensive to develop than a standard greenfield site. That, coupled with the fact that the site was purchased before the recession, house prices fell and costs went up.
Let me ask you a bit about the contamination. I mean, this wasn't a chemicals factory, was it? It was a seed factory. Was there really that much to clean up?
Well, yes, there's a lot of concrete covering the whole site. There's quite a complex drainage system to put in. So it's just an unusual site relative to a normal site pertaining to a rural district such as Suffolk Coastal.
Hopkins is a very successful firm. Profits are healthy. And now, in Framlingham and elsewhere, house prices have recovered. Indeed, house prices in East Anglia, according to the Office for National Statistics, surged to a record high in 2014. So wouldn't the rising market now allow for the affordable housing? Robert Eburn.
The market has risen to a certain extent, but also have build costs, and many people would say that build costs are actually outstripping the increase in the market.
What about a review mechanism then, agreed on other developments, by which the council shares the profit with the developers if and when the profit on the development rises above 20%?
But then you're asking for a share to be given of a projected future profit. Is it right that a profit should just be shared?
What do you think? Is it right?
Well, it depends upon risk. The developer is putting the risk, buying the site, putting his endeavours into seeing the site redeveloped, but the council isn't taking any risk, so why should the council share the profit?
Councillor Jeff Holdcroft holds the planning portfolio for Suffolk Coastal. What does he think of having its affordable housing policy overturned by the viability report on which the inspector based his decision?
Well, my first reaction was one of disappointment. Really is a finely balanced approach that the inspector has to take. We do need homes in this district, and there's an overwhelming need for that. We've got to build nearly 8,000 homes over a period of 15 years. So it's a matter of balance between developing the site or potentially perhaps leaving it derelict there for another 5 or 10 years.
There's another thing you need to know about viability assessments. They are commercially confidential. You and I can't read them. Sometimes even councillors themselves can't see them. Councillor Chris Hudson, the chairman of Suffolk Coastal Council, is outspoken about viability reports.
Let us have the viability study open to transparent inspection by the elected members. We're shrouded here, aren't we, in commercial confidentiality and say publish and be damned, because there is the public interest here. And we need councillors to get off their backsides and question seriously the sort of contracts that delegated authority is giving to people. Look at the documents and see what the hell you're signing away. We need much more training. We need top-flight lawyers, because we're in here in a battle against people who are clued up and resourced.
Now, the new plan for Framlingham Station site is for 100 dwellings without any affordable housing. James Hopkins.
We've come up with a big, broad mix of starter homes right the way up to 4-bedroom detached houses, but there's a high proportion of 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom starter homes, which should be affordable for people in the community.
In your view, does including affordable housing in a development depress the price of the other homes for sale?
No, I don't think it does. We've been building affordable housing for many, many years now, and people are very happy to buy on a site that has affordable housing. So whether it's affordable or open market, it will look the same.
And yet we notice that your plans of sites, the affordable houses, are kind of blanked out in grey. It almost looks as though they're a different quality. Why do you do that?
They're definitely not of a different quality. We use lots of different colours on our brochures, and it's just one of the colours we use.
And yet, in the brochure for the Kingfisher Place development in nearby Leiston, all the other types of houses are given names. The bittern, the mallard, the grebe, etc. And they're shown in glossy photographs. There's no name and no photo for the affordable housing. And some locals may wish it to be airbrushed away. There's often a degree of objection to the idea of social rented housing on a site, according to Councillor Jeff Holdcroft.
It's not down just to developers, it's down to the communities and what they want as well. Some need to be convinced of the need to have affordable homes to keep the young people there.
Where there is an obligation to provide affordable housing, some developers opt instead to pay what's called a commuted sum. They pay the council money to build the affordables somewhere else, so that the developers' sites are used purely to sell homes at full market prices. It might sound fair enough, but planning expert Richard Fordham is not impressed.
The truth is that that commuted sum is virtually never enough to build the 3 affordable housing units somewhere else. And so, in my practice, and I've negotiated thousands of these things, I've never accepted one. So I'm afraid that commuted sums are usually a way of avoiding the problem, and it's often convenient for the council not to get involved in all the technical details of negotiation which they don't really understand, so they accept what sounds like a large sum of money.
Is the money ring-fenced for affordable housing?
The good councils do indeed ring-fence it. I'm afraid not all of them, no.
So it could be spent on anything else that the council needs to spend money on?
Well, councils are very hard-pressed.
What's more, commuted sums are also argued down by developers using, you've guessed it, viability assessments. In a recent case in Blackpool, where Kensington Developments submitted plans to build 584 houses at Marton Moss, a sum of £22 million was agreed as a payment to the council in lieu of affordable and low-cost housing. But using a viability report, the developer was able to reduce that sum to £5 million. While commuted sums may sometimes be justified, there's concern about the consequences, a segregation of housing for the rich and poor, which may be bad for the whole community. Which takes us back to London and the most recent controversy over affordable housing. Shane Brownie lives in a new block of flats on Greenwich Peninsula in South London, where a huge development by a Hong Kong company called Night Dragon is about to roll out.
So we're here on your roof terrace, Shane, with a 360-degree view right around Greenwich, around the peninsula. It's a stunning view, the River Thames in front of us gleaming in the sunlight. There's a big open space at the moment with extremely tall cranes between us and the dome.
Yes, so as you can see, to the north of the peninsula, at the top, the O2, and just to the west of it you can see the fantastically designed bus station and the North Greenwich Tube Station. And indeed the cable car to the right, flowing across the Thames.
But looking around here, can you tell me how different the original vision for this site, as agreed in the master plan back in 2004, how different is that from what's happening now?
The original master plan set out affordable housing allocation of 35% across all plots across the East Greenwich Peninsula, and subsequent to that the developers entered into a legally binding contract with the Mayor and Council to deliver that. However, on the arrival of the Hong Kong developer, those agreements were negotiated behind closed doors downwards from 35% to 21%, and to be polarised by the affordable housing being concentrated down one end on the south and no provision on the river and closer to the tube station.
Now, you live in this handsome block of flats right by the river. Why does it matter how many affordable homes there might be in blocks like this?
It matters hugely because if you don't, you create communities that frankly become quite polarised. I mean, for a lot of residents here, that's not the community we want to live in.
When Boris Johnson visited the site, he was asked about the way the developers had used a viability report to argue down the provision of affordable housing, a reduction of 527 homes.
Obviously, in an ideal world, we'd like it higher. That's what the council consented. You know, in the end, it's a judgment, isn't it? Because if you put it too high, then they're going to say, well, we can't make a go of it, we can't actually develop it. And I'm convinced that the best solution is to get the homes available for Londoners rather than just leaving the land derelict. The reason it's low down at a quarter, here they've had to do massive decontamination.
But we've been told that the decontamination was paid for out of the public purse. Greenwich and Woolwich Labour MP Matthew Pennycook.
Well, I have the planning document here, you're absolutely right. English Partnership, which became the Homes and Communities Agency, had invested a significant amount of money, I think 250 million plus, in decontaminating and remediating the site. Whether there were additional costs in the reconfiguration of the site, I don't know, but it certainly wouldn't have warranted or been the sole reason why the levels of affordable housing on the site dropped from the 38% that was in the initial Section 106 agreement to the mid to low 20s. That was done on the basis of the viability assessment, which was developers saying 38% affordable housing is not viable in the current market. The context, by the time we came to 2012, had changed completely.
Viability reports, remember, are confidential. But Night Dragon's report was eventually released after a tribunal ruled that it was in the public interest. The Bureau of Investigative Journalism was able to analyse the figures which Night Dragon had used to reduce the number of cheaper, affordable homes on the site. Nick Mathiasen is the Bureau's business correspondent.
Fundamental to that assessment were two assertions. One suggesting that house prices hadn't risen in 2012 and weren't going to rise in 2013. And then two, the scheme was going to fetch between £521 and £671 per square foot. Well, we looked at the market in Greenwich around that time and looked at one major development that was built on the Greenwich Peninsula. We looked at all of the transaction records on the land registry, and then we found data that told us how big those flats were, so we could work out the square footage of those units. And what we found was that those flats had increased in value by 6% in 2012 and by 7.5% in 2013. So those appraisals were saying the market was flat. We could see the market was actually growing at a reasonable rate. So we think that there was a tens of millions of pounds undervaluation linked to that site. So there could have been more affordable homes included in the scheme.
If that is correct, then why did Greenwich councillors agree to the deal? We asked the council for an interview.
Unfortunately, we'll have to decline this opportunity as there are some current planning matters on the peninsula due for consideration by our planning board, so we're not in a position to comment given these issues are pending.
Matthew Pennycook MP was a Greenwich councillor when those planning decisions were being made, though he did not play a direct part in them. He defends the council's decision.
Development has stalled on the peninsula in the wake of the recession. We needed to get it restarted and getting building going. And crucially, that context where viability assessments have been introduced and the central government grant have been slashed, that was the context in which the decision was made. There was £50 million plus of GLA grant that was time limited, and if an agreement wasn't drawn up, it would have been lost. I don't think the agreement was ideal. I took issue at the time with the concentration of the affordable housing in one particular section of the site. But let me be very clear, if an agreement had not been reached, I think the affordable housing that we did secure would have been lost, and we would have been in a situation where we could have had potentially less affordable housing and less genuinely affordable target rent housing had a deal not been made.
But would Night Dragon really have walked away if you'd said no?
But they may just not have built anything. And when you are talking about a housing crisis like we have in London and 15,000 people on their council waiting lists, we needed to get development going in some form.
And now Night Dragon are back with another revised plan to intensify the number of homes on the peninsula to 15,500 in 5 village districts. This is what they told us.
Night Dragon has invested £500 million so far and is committed to delivering a vibrant and viable development. We're able to deliver more homes because the previous constraints on building heights have been modified. Of the 15,500 homes, there will be private properties and a meaningful number of affordable properties delivered in each district.
There is no hint of what a meaningful number of affordables might be. But in London's rising property market, it would appear that Night Dragon will be making a healthy profit.
They no doubt will, and we try and build in now to all our agreements a review mechanism. On a more positive note, they made a commitment to tenure-blind development across the site, that you have affordable housing mixed in with private ownership and that you wouldn't be able to tell the difference, ideally, between the two.
Well, they haven't said, have they, what level of affordable housing there would be on the new plan?
They haven't said. I've told them privately in discussions that they should say. I don't think they'll get a decision at the planning board if they don't put a specified number down, and I think if that number is anything below 30%, they're going to have genuine problems both with myself and the local community, because we want to see, particularly if they want to increase the height and density of the development on the peninsula, the public are going to want to see that they are going to get benefits from that change in terms of jobs, better infrastructure and higher levels of affordable housing than we've seen over recent years.
Matthew Pennycook MP. No government spokesperson was available for interview on the mechanism for delivering affordable housing nationally. But Housing and Planning Minister Brandon Lewis told us this in a statement.
Nearly 217,000 new affordable homes have been delivered since 2010. We've also levered in £19.5 billion of public and private funding investment in affordable house building, with a further £38 billion, which will help ensure a further 275,000 new affordable homes over the next 5 years. Councils can and do scrutinise developers' viability evidence when negotiating affordable housing contributions on a site-by-site basis. Sites stalled due to unviable affordable housing requirements deliver no regeneration, no community benefits and no housing, affordable or otherwise.
Let's face it, a system which makes commercial developers responsible for building affordable homes was always going to struggle. The profit incentive naturally pushes them to wriggle out of those obligations, especially so since planning rules have been loosened. And that means the promise of the standard 30% of new homes being affordable has been broken again and again by councils across the UK. So where should we look for a better way to do things? Well, maybe to a giant city with a similar housing crisis to London's. Let's end with the view from New York, where the mayor, Bill de Blasio, has radically altered the way the city deals with developers. Listen to Alicia Glenn, who is the mayor's deputy with responsibility for housing.
We're actually in the process of putting in place a mandatory program which says to developers, in areas where we are creating the right to either build additional residential units or taking a property that was a commercial or a manufacturing property and allowing you to build residential, it's not an option anymore. If you want to build that building, you must provide affordable housing. But it is a game changer, a different way of engaging with the private sector. There's not going to be, everybody has to build 25% affordable housing, whether you built an 8-unit building or a 100-unit building. But we're also not going to be in a situation where each developer is going to walk in and try to explain to you why I can't make my numbers. That's not a sustainable policy, and it's certainly not a way to actually give even developers and bankers the certainty they need to know what the deal is. We want to say this is the deal. We're open for business. It's not about specials. This is what it is, and we're going to be very transparent as to what the requirements are, and we believe the market will respond in a positive way. And we need, as the public sector, to be able to come to that table with the best lawyers, the best bankers, folks who know how to negotiate transactions. I cannot stand the thought that a developer would be able to pull one on the public sector because they don't have the intellectual or human capital to strike the right bargain for the public.